This is Count MRVHS with a look at Viking Invasion 2, one of my favorite mods for Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion. This is set up as a sequel for the famous expansion of Medieval Total War that came out back in 2002. Viking Invasion was set on a map that focused on the British Isles, and of course, the action began at the dawn of the Viking Age. I think the campaign in Viking Invasion was set in 793 or 796, with essentially the raid on Lindisfarne. This mod makes a few changes to that starting setup. We look at a different date, we see some different faction configurations, but otherwise it takes a lot of inspiration from that, and everything from the music to the images to the way the factions play is designed to get you back in the mood of that classic expansion. So let's take a look at the campaign. So we have 10 factions to choose from here in Viking Invasion 2. We've got 4 English factions: the East Angles, the Northumbrians, the Mercians, and the West Saxons. Possibly in some ways the stars of the show. This is the faction from which Alfred will arise in about 20 turns or so. We also have 4 Celtic factions: the Welsh, the men of Leinster in Ireland, the O'Neill in Northern Ireland, and the men of Alba in Scotland. And we have not one but 2 Viking factions, the Danes and the Norwegians. Now you may notice that I'm playing a patched version of the mod, Dominion of Britannia 1.2. That is in some ways the most recent version of the mod, but it did make some differences from the base version of the mod. Some of those included the addition of a couple of factions. The East Angles were not originally a faction that existed, and originally in Viking Invasion 2 there was only a single Irish faction, but here it's split up into 2. I like this. It gets a little more faction variety. This gives you some more stuff to do on the campaign map. And here we are looking at Wessex on the campaign map. We begin with 4 settlements and a fort, and some pretty good territory in the south-central part of what would later become England. You'll notice, though, if we look at our king, he is the king and he is crowned, but he has a long way to go in terms of his traits. Traits in this mod work a little bit differently. Instead of having a plethora of traits that fill up the screen very quickly, this mod is a bit more modest and a bit more deliberate with how traits are handed out. For example, the crowned trait is something that you acquire only when you spend a turn in your capital or in another important settlement. Usually that's going to be indicated by the verbiage on the provincial information building, which is part of every settlement that you'll find on the map. This building gives you a little background, a little geographical discussion. It also tells you what country or what kingdom these territories would be part of. So, for example, this is one of the main regions of Wessex, and as such, the title of King of Wessex is bestowed upon the Anglo-Saxon king, whose forces capture this province along with the others listed here. So our king, although he is the king of our faction, is not yet the King of Wessex because he doesn't own all of the territory that comprises that realm. Similarly, he could eventually become the King of England, but he would need to conquer all of Wessex, all of the provinces that comprise Mercia, and those that comprise East Anglia and Northumbria. So there's a bit of realm formation happening here, but it's reflected in the traits rather than in the name of the faction itself. In terms of units, you might expect the Anglo-Saxons to be quite good at infantry and less impressive when it comes to cavalry and ranged, and that is pretty much what you would find here. At your first tier of barracks, you'll get some basic spears. At your second tier, you'll get fearedmen, which come with the ability to form a shield wall, as well as to throw some javelins. And then at tier 3, you'll get some really good stuff. Armored spearmen, thanes, which are very heavily armored swordsmen that inspire nearby troops, and select feared, which are an up-armored, just all-around better version of your lower-tier fearedmen. Slightly smaller unit size, more expensive, but otherwise an extremely solid unit to have. Population, though, is very much a factor in this mod, and it's something you'll have to give a lot of thought to. This mod does use the basic mechanics of Rome Total War when it comes to advancing your settlements. So you can see that we've got a population of 1,650 men in Winchester, but in order for us to upgrade the city, we'll need to get it up to 6,000. That means that you're probably going to want to keep your taxes fairly low to at least encourage the populations to grow in your settlements. It also means that elite troops that you start with are going to be quite valuable, as you won't necessarily be able to train them or retrain them for quite some time. Probably a good early move for Wessex is to take your men and send them into the east, where there is already a presence of Danish Vikings here right outside of London, and they have established a beachhead in Kent as well. So if we get our king out and we sort of match him up with all of the other armies from the other settlements, we can assemble a pretty good army that can hopefully beat what the Vikings are going to throw at us.
We're surrounded.
And indeed, from the very first turn, we find that we're attacked in London. This settlement has no walls initially, and there's a very large Viking army outside. We've only got some peasants to defend it, and so we're going to lose this. We'll just hit the auto-resolve here. However, there is a note attached where it says, using this option when attacking or defending walls will greatly disadvantage the defender. And that is because the walls are not taken into account. The walls, the towers, the overall layout of the settlement does not factor into the auto-resolve. It considers the battle to be fought on a completely flat plane. And a battle that you might otherwise win, you might end up losing through the auto-resolve. However, in this case, there's no way we would hope to win. So I'm happy to auto-resolve this. Well, maybe not happy. In terms of immersion, this mod also offers something great in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle entries that appear every turn or so when your messages appear. So here we've got the entry for AD 851. It's got a very nice image from the Peterborough version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and it tells you down here where these entries are from, what translation you can find them in. So it gives a bit of historical background in terms of the things that were actually happening over the course of the mod. And here we're being attacked by an army of Danes. It looks like they're feeling pretty good about themselves. And maybe that is with some good reason. They've got some very strong units in these mercenary Joms Vikings, some impressive Huscarls and armored spearmen, but I think with our numbers we should be able to take them. So let's jump into the battle. So here we are on the battlefield, and we've set up in a nice shield wall formation. Many of the units you can train as the Anglo-Saxon and Viking factions can perform this shield wall, and several of them do get some ranged capabilities as well. Our Fearedmen have a few javelins, so do our Royal Hearth, which is a very nice looking bodyguard unit here, and it is worth bringing some of your family members to the fight, as they can make up for some of the deficiencies in your fairly defensive roster. One of the weakest units we have here is this basic Spearmen. They don't have any javelins, they can't form a shield wall, but they'll be useful for doing some flanking and maybe chasing down archers. And speaking of archers, we do have a single unit here. Archers may not make up a tremendously impressive part of the Anglo-Saxon roster, but you can at least train them as well as slingers at your one level of ranged barracks.
Spears.
Some of our more impressive units include these armored spearmen, which we will eventually be able to train at higher level settlements, and Thanes, third tier swordsman unit, which has a war flag to inspire nearby units. I've set them up in the middle here of our feared line to hopefully give them a bit of a morale boost. The enemy army, meanwhile, has these very impressive-looking Huscarls. They have battle axes as well as swords, so they're something of a mixed bag. The swords are far less effective than their axes. But these Joms Vikings are the units that I'm worried about. They've got axes, they're effective against armor, they can form a tortoise arch, which is essentially a testudo. They frighten the nearby enemy, and they've got great morale. Just an all-around terrifying unit to have to face. They'll do a lot of damage to us today. Some of the more basic troops are these lower tier Vikings. They look absolutely fantastic. They can form a shield wall, but they're not going to be super effective. They're going to be pretty much swift raiders, and I think we should be able to hold them off with our spearmen. The Vikings do have some good archer units, however. These archers can serve as a melee unit as well as ranged, so if they get into a good position, they can do some good flanking with their axes. And the captain unit in this army is a unit of armored spearmen, one of my favorite looking units in the mod. They've got, of course, these very striking looking shields. They have spears, but as you can tell from their backs, they're also carrying some swords to use. So they can use those as a secondary weapon, which means they'll pull them out in the charge. So our Fearedmen are beginning to throw, and we're doing some damage to the Viking lines here. Let's get our spearmen in. just sit tight to receive that charge, and we'll do a bit of flanking with our other units when the moment is right.
Attack! Spear good! Attack! We're under attack! Spears! Kill them! Attack! Swordsman! Archers! Kill them! Very good! Charge! Swordsman! Spears! Move! Swordsman! Move! Spear! Hurry! Move! Butcher them! Very good!
And we're getting our bodyguard stuck in against these Vikings here. Hopefully he'll do pretty well. Victory seems certain. We are taking a few losses, and I am concerned that they are getting caught up with these mercenary Joms Vikings here.
Swordsman!
However, over here we do have the opportunity to do a bit of flanking with our Thanes and potentially isolate and wipe out this general unit of theirs of armored spearmen.
Spears! Very good!
One of the things I really love about this mod is the music is right from the medieval Total War soundtrack. I think all of it is. Maybe there are a few other tracks from Rome, but it's just a very nostalgic feeling. Good stuff. The battles also tend to play out similar to medieval ones. That is, fairly slower engagements, giving you some time to do some flanking. Not so frantic as the pace of the vanilla Rome's battles. Although our general has won in the fight against the Vikings on the right, I'm still a bit hesitant to bring him into the fight with these mercenary Joms Vikings. We'll try to get some more progress going on the left before we commit more troops to this. We just want to hold out as long as possible here.
Attack! Spears! Slaughter them! Archers! Slaughter them! Swordsman!
And the enemy general is routing. And there he goes under a massive feared. And with the enemy general down, we can bring our forces around to our right and deal with the much stronger portion, Huskarls and mercenary Joms Vikings. They still seem to be doing fairly well, but if we get these Huskarls to waver and rout, then the Joms Vikings may not be too far behind.
Units! Units, make haste! Archers! Units! Units! Charge! Units!
And there they go, a quick charge from our Thanes and our other Fearedmen, and we were able to rout those guys. We'll definitely continue the battle as we want to make sure those Huskarls and mercenary Joms Vikings are completely eliminated, so our push into the east is going to be a bit easier. And it looks like we lost a family member while I wasn't paying attention. We have a heroic death here of Athelstan, one of our family members. But in addition to the music, you can see the visuals here are drawn from Medieval 1. In the buildings, in the battle cutscene type of images, it brings you back to that sort of style. So very deliberate on the part of the developers there. And although we won, we did take quite a few losses, 170 men. So that's going to hurt our push to the east, but that's one of the things you have to live with when you're playing an Anglo-Saxon faction fighting against the Vikings. And as if to make up for the loss of our general there, we have a candidate for adoption. This guy is a Roman Christian, and so are all of our family members at the moment. So let's take a moment to talk about that. Depending on what faction you choose, whether Celtic or Anglo-Saxon, you will have a different trait here in terms of Christianity. This mod does use Barbarian Invasion as a base, and so religion is an important mechanic here. But in addition to just determining what type of religion the settlement follows, the different family members will have different flavors of that religion. So within Christianity, there is a Roman Christian version, which is associated with the Anglo-Saxon factions, and there is a Celtic Christian version that is associated with the factions like the Irish, the Welsh, and the Scottish factions. You can see here that because this individual is a Roman Christian, he's going to give a +2 unrest in Celtic provinces. That means that as you advance or try to advance into places like Cornwall, Wales, Scotland, or Ireland, as an Anglo-Saxon faction, you may find your family members are actually causing some public order problems. Now, this trait can change. You can lose it. You can become a Celtic Christian, so to speak, by spending time in settlements with the high enough church buildings. But for the most part, this does give a bit of a nod to the fact that we have some different traditions going on within this realm, and it's not simply Christian versus pagan. Speaking of paganism, though, we have a couple of Viking factions that both start off as pagans, although they can convert to Christianity under various conditions. We're looking at the Norwegian starting position here, which starts off in western Norway with a couple of settlements, although this is by far the more widespread faction on the map. They also have some territory in Orkney, the Western Isles of Scotland, the Isle of Man, and a settlement, even 2 settlements in Ireland, Dublin and Cork. Now, as a pagan faction, the Vikings can build pagan shrines. Now, this may not necessarily be a good idea depending on where you are located. If we attempt to build a pagan shrine here, that's not going to be a problem for us. You can see that in the settlement detail scroll, it's just going to increase our public order bonus due to law. But as we conquer other territories that are largely Christian, we may see some massive unrest if we try to convert the population, just as you would imagine based on Barbarian Invasion. So, in other words, it may not always be a good move to try to convert as a Viking faction. And usually what I do is just let the Christian places be Christian, let the pagan places be pagan, and only worry about working up pagan shrines in my own territory. If you do work up pagan shrines, however, to the 3rd tier at the minor city level, you'll be rewarded with some excellent units as the Norwegians, berserkers here. These, of course, can go berserk. They have a war cry ability. They frighten the nearby enemy infantry, and they are effective against armor. Some of the most fun units to use, in my opinion, in this mod. However, to make up for that, the Vikings, the Norwegians at any rate, do not have the ability to train any cavalry or even to build stables. They're relying very heavily on their infantry. You can recruit mercenary riders from various places on the map, but if you're playing as the Norwegians, you'll never be able to train your own native cav. The Danes, however, do get the option to train some cavalry, but they can't build the stables. So what you have to do as the Danes is conquer a settlement from an Anglo-Saxon or Celtic faction that has already built a stable, and then you can train cavalry out of there. You're essentially stealing the horses from the native population. Kind of a nice touch. Another thing to keep in mind is that this mod uses an interesting mechanic when it comes to mercenaries. In addition to being able to recruit mercenaries out of the field, you can also recruit them from certain taverns. This is a line of buildings that is reminiscent of what you could build in the original medieval Total War, where mercenaries were indeed dependent on buildings. Here you can, depending on where you are located on the map, build drinking halls and occasionally get units to train out of them. At higher tiers, you can get different types of units. And of course, the units you can train depend on where you have built the building. So here in Ireland, at the first tier of a tavern at a drinking hall, we can get mercenary Bannochts, which are a fairly cheap and interesting spear and javelin unit, sort of a native Irish troop that you can train. And at the higher tiers of those taverns, mercenary Galgael, which I am not pronouncing correctly, but that's just fine. This is an axe and shield unit with some good morale, a combat bonus in the woods, and a powerful charge. The other thing about these mercenaries that are available out of the tavern line of buildings is that they can be recruited as many as you can within a single turn. They don't take any time to train, and so it can be a very quick, although extremely expensive, way to boost your armies. Different factions get different units based on different locations. So if you're playing an Anglo-Saxon faction, you might have mercenary two-handed axe units. If you're playing a Celtic faction, you might have mercenary longbowmen, in addition to all the native troops you can train. And again, this is a mod that really sticks close to its roots in the original Viking Invasion for Medieval Total War. It's not trying to do crazy things. It's not trying to add a million new factions on the map. It's trying to stick fairly close to what we saw in that classic expansion and deliver you the type of gameplay that you're going to expect. It is an extremely solid, very stable mod with some fun faction formation mechanics, some interesting unit types, and a very diverse lineup depending on what faction you're choosing. So in the end, should you play Viking Invasion 2 in the current year? Well, yeah, of course. If you're interested in playing a mod with some fairly easy to jump into mechanics, but some very challenging gameplay when it comes to kingdom expansion and economy and population mechanics, then definitely give this one a look. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I hope you'll check me out in the next video. Until then, take care.